Okay, hello and a very warm welcome. We are delighted to invite you to the International Sleep Charity's first global webinar. My name's Charlie Alton and I'm one of the founders of the charity, and our primary focus is helping people sleep better through facilitating education, scientific research and instigating a platform for international global collaboration. You can find out more on our website, internationalsleepcharity.org. Now, this webinar series is openly accessible over Zoom, and each session is around 45 minutes in length. We invite expert clinicians, thought leaders, scientists around the world to give a brief sleep-themed talk and then conduct a relaxed, intelligent conversation with our guests, incorporating questions that you submit in the filtered question and answers, and we'll do that at the end of the session. Now, Professor Michael Chee of the National University of Singapore joins us today, and he's a brilliant first guest. He's involved in a really important area of research. He's top of his field, and the bit I probably love best of all, he's also good at getting his research implemented for measurable benefit. Mike is director of the Center of Sleep and Cognition at the NUS Yong Lin School of Medicine. He's a physician and neurologist by training, and his present research seeks to reduce the impact of degraded or restricted sleep on cognitive performance, well-being and health span. I think it's noticeable that his advocacy for science and its relevance to the common person, and also his works appeared in leading international media such as Time magazine, The Economist and the BBC. He has appeared in scientific documentaries and written commentaries on topics on health, science and the importance of sleep. And in 2009, he received the National Outstanding Clinician Scientist Award, and this year he's become an inaugural fellow of the Organization of Human Brain Mapping. So Mike, thank you so much for joining us from your home in Singapore, where it's late at night.
Oh, thank you, Charlie, for the and Connor for the invitation to share this material with you.
Okay.
Shall I get started?
Yes, I think you are the main event, Mike. So please, I'm going to stop sharing and over to you.
Okay. Just give me a second. All right, so you can see.
Yep.
All right, so I thought I'd share about a set of studies that I've been associated with now for 6 years, which I'm pretty proud of. It's the Need for Sleep series of studies, and I'll show you a link to the microsite at the end of the talk. All right, so I think most of us involved in education or being educated really like to optimize our performance. And, you know, for those of us in Singapore, in the Far East, you know, sleep is an area that is a tremendous opportunity for us to optimize performance. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about the motivation for this series of 5 studies we've conducted so far, how different sleep restriction schedules affect fundamental cognitive processes in adolescents, what the benefits of longish 60 to 90-minute mid-afternoon nap are, and then just a touch on what the potential neurocorrelates of these naps might be. So the issue of adolescents not getting enough sleep is a global issue, but it's probably more widespread in East Asia, where I come from. And when one talks about recommendations or the recommended sleep duration to young people in our part of the world, frequently, you know, when one mentions 8 to 10 hours, typically you're met with some laughter, because more than 85% of our secondary school students sleep less than this recommended amount. You know, this despite the fact that specialists and scientists, neuroscientists, have, in particular, have identified, you know, adolescence as, you know, a second period or window of opportunity for us to influence brain development, because it's a period of vulnerability as well as one of opportunity. they are, and the habits that one puts in place at this time of life can, set us up for a lifetime. So brain imaging has shown that dramatic changes in the maturation of the brain occur in adolescence, and here you can see there's pretty dramatic thinning of the cerebral cortex, representing the pruning of neurons and remodeling of the brain. And alongside, you can see these are the spectral decompositions of EEG, showing the differences in the EEG signatures um, as the adolescent brain matures. Now, the key obstacle, if in, it sounds strange, it is an obstacle, it's something to be very proud of in some ways, that to getting more sleep in our part of the world is the obsession on academic success. And you can see that Singapore's, at least in 2016, was pretty much on top of the totem pole, and many of the countries in East Asia are very proud of that position. However, this extreme focus on academics comes at a cost, and one of the offsets is actually a reduction in sleep duration. In this plot that comes from the work of my colleague Josh Gooley, which I'm proud to be part of, you can see that there is a very strong dose effect. And this is the sleep duration. And you can see with shorter sleep duration, hope you can see my cursor, there is an increased risk of self-harm thoughts, physical signs of anxiety, anxiety itself, feelings of worthlessness. So the mental health impact of sleep restriction is, or short sleep, is very significant and something that is too big to ignore, right? And certainly one does not like to be near grumpy people. When we first started this work, the literature till 2015 suggested that there were likely effects on sustained attention or vigilance, possible effects on working memory and executive function, and that sleep after learning helps, but it's less clear that sleep before learning, is useful. And those of you interested can look at this systematic review by Albert de Bruin in about 2017. Now, one of the works that actually spurred us on to perform the investigations we subsequently did was this work by Boulder-Holzer, who actually put adolescents through different levels of sleep restriction from 7 down to 5 hours, and had participants encode material before this period of sleep restriction. I think they underwent about several days of sleep restriction, and there was apparently no effect when memory was tested at day 8 and day 36. And they argued that this was because a critical stage of sleep, the slow wave sleep, was relatively well defended even when you were down to 5 hours time in bed at night. And this was over several nights of sleep restriction. So in 2014, we launched the first of the Need for Sleep series of studies. Each of these studies was conducted in a high school dormitory. It involved secondary school students between the ages of 15 to 19, and we were able to get just shy of 60 participants for each of these studies. And they stayed in this dormitory for 15 to 17 days under quasi-laboratory conditions. They all underwent a standardized test battery 3 times a day, from which you get a lot of the data that I'm going to share now. And the participants were typically healthy, 15 to 18 years of age, and they were high performing students. So we focused initially on fundamental cognitive constructs like attention, working memory, executive function, and speed of processing, because extant research has shown that they predict general intelligence, which in turn predict success in a variety of life outcomes. So just to remind, we tested participants 3 times a day and analyzed the mean results. So this is what the study protocol for the first of the 5 studies looks like. There were 3 baseline nights where the participants had 9 hours time in bed or sleep opportunity. And then the group of about 60 participants was split into a control group who slept 9 hours and a manipulation group M who slept 5 hours a night for, in this case, 7 nights. And you can see that the objective evidence that this schedule was maintained. And then there was a period of recovery sleep. So our most robust test of the effects of sleep restriction was something we call the psychomotor vigilance task, in which one looks out for the appearance of a running series of digits, and you're supposed to respond as quickly as possible. And after this, you see your response time. If your response time is twice that of the average, which is about half a second, it's marked as a lapse. And you can see that increasing the cumulative increase in number of lapses as successive nights of sleep restriction occurs, right? And then incomplete recovery during the recovery nights of sleep. Now, what's interesting is that, and this result's been shown by Hans van Dongen and others, that while the objective measure of vigilance shows cumulative worsening through successive nights of sleep restriction, subjective sleepiness does worsen, but it tends to plateau after a few nights. And this is the dissociation between objective and subjective markers of sleepiness that is so important for young people to recognize, because it's like boiling a frog. If you do it slowly, the frog might not notice, but if you just dump it in hot water, it will certainly jump out. So in addition to vigilance, speed of processing, evaluated by 2-digit mental arithmetic or the symbol digit modalities test, where the participant has to decode these symbols and punch in digits as quickly as possible, shows in the control group gradual improvement, but in the sleep restricted group, an impairment of improvement, which doesn't fully catch up during recovery sleep. And this works for both tests. And with working memory or executive function, this is the NBAC task, where one is a classic task of working memory, and you can see decline after multiple nights of sleep restriction. And finally, very important, mood declines. Positive mood is significantly lowered at the after a few nights of successive sleep restriction. Now, what is in the subsequent studies, we shortened the period of manipulation to 5 nights to simulate a school day week. And what we found was we replicated that effect of cumulative decline in vigilance, incomplete recovery on the simulated weekend. But what was interesting is that upon re-exposure to a second bout of sleep restriction, the effects were compounded. So we liken this repeated exposure on successive nights to sleep restriction like going above the 8,000 meter line in mountaineering, which is the death zone, and even people who are supremely fit cannot survive for extended periods there. So sleep restriction has the analogy is there, you suffer if you are exposed repeatedly to sleep restriction. Now, when we do surveys on our secondary school students, and not hundreds but thousands of them, we found that amongst the higher performing students, many of them claim that they sleep only 6.5 hours a night on weekday nights. Now, we tested this claim in our quasi-laboratory study, and we found that you can't sustain optimal vigilance with this level of sleep restriction. So what's happening is likely these students are falling asleep in class or they're taking naps in the afternoon in order to maintain some semblance of attention in their classes. So you can see that 6.5 hours a night is not much better than 5 hours a night. In fact, it's just as bad, but you only see the lessening of the deterioration in the second week of sleep restriction. So 6.5 hours a night isn't enough for optimal vigilance performance, but the recommended 8 hours a night will suffice. And you can see this is a result of the fifth study that we just completed and published recently. 8 hours a night will give you comparable vigilance performance to the control group who slept 9 hours a night. Now, it's very difficult in many places to persuade governments or school boards to shift school start times to a later time. And we in Singapore start at 7:30 already, so that's pretty bad. It's very difficult to shift the entrenched desire to sleep late to study more and then have to wake up early in the school. But maybe you can do something with afternoon naps. So when we instituted a 60-minute mid-afternoon nap, we found that it had a really dramatic effect on reducing the vigilance decline in our adolescent participants. However, as you can see here, with the 1 hour nap, there isn't complete normalization of performance. You see this improvement in sleepiness, which is also very strong. Now, what's interesting is that you can nap, without, some people advise against naps in adults because they're concerned that it can compromise nocturnal sleep, but it doesn't. And it doesn't when sleep is restricted to 5 hours time in bed. It's not even, nocturnal sleep isn't even compromised if you have 6.5 hours of sleep at night, as I'll show you in a bit. So what about other combinations of sleep? So in particular, how does an equivalent amount of sleep over 24 hours pan out if you take it in one continuous swoop at night versus a shorter nocturnal sleep and a mid-afternoon nap? So this is the question we posed in the 4th and 5th edition of our Need for Sleep series of studies. And here, what you see is that we, the study protocol, we compared 8 hours at night continuous versus split into 6.5 and then 1.5, or 6 hours, 6.5 hours at night compared to 5 hours at night and 1.5 hours afternoon nap. So this is the summary of a lot of data collected. And you can see that naps have a very dramatic effect on reducing vigilance lapses. But when the total sleep time is restricted, they have a dramatic benefit, but they don't normalize performance. 8 hours will cut it. And what's very interesting is how 8 hours of sleep is distributed doesn't materially affect vigilance. Now, whether it affects other things like metabolic function, we don't know yet, but 8 hours, if you take it continuously or you split it, seems to give the same pretty good results. Now, many students go to school not to just stay awake and hammer, play the game of knock the mole out, but to learn about things, right? In particular, they have to accumulate a fair number of facts to get through school. And there is a wealth of research, talking about the importance of sleep for memory consolidation, and less research on encoding, which we sort of specialized in. But here's a little schematic showing how you could test the different aspects of memory processes. So learning something effectively involves properly encoding the material, consolidating it, meaning that you protect it from either decay or interference with similar but actually not the same material, and then retrieval, And these are ways in which you can evaluate encoding after multiple nights of sleep restriction, and then you allow for some recovery, and then you can test recall. And for consolidation, you would learn, allow for either proper sleep or short sleep, and then test for recall. And finally, for retrieval, um, you would you would learn at with adequate sleep, and then allow adequate sleep, consolidate, and you test retrieval, and then you can test the same thing with shortened sleep. Now, picture encoding is a task that we used in our experiments, and it was inspired by this work by Matt Walker's group, showing that there is impaired hippocampal recruitment following a night of total sleep deprivation when participants had to encode pictures, right? And we found that the cortical representation in higher visual areas is compromised if you had to encode this material when you're sleep deprived. So we've actually evaluated, and if you look through our, what we've produced in different tests on memory, but today, in the interest of time, I'll just talk about picture encoding and the fact learning. So with picture encoding, what participants do is they view pictures, and they have to make a decision on whether the picture was a building or not a building, incidentally encoding the picture, and then they were tested later whether they recall seeing that a particular picture and the confidence with which they made that judgment. So we allowed participants to undergo a baseline normal sleep, and then the manipulation period, and then we tested encoding after different doses of sleep restriction. And what we found was that with 9 versus 5, I mean, the answer is pretty obvious. You're going to be better off with 9 hours than 5 hours. But what was surprising is that if you had only 6.5 hours to sleep, the split sleep schedule, gave as much, almost as equivalent performance to the 9-hour group. Now, we put this on separate plots because the timing of the encoding and testing was slightly different. But in a subsequent experiment, comparing the total 6.5 hours and total 8 hours, you can see that pretty much, you get the same result. So the split sleep schedule is actually superior for picture encoding, right? So episodic encoding, split sleep schedule looks superior to continuous sleep. Now, fact learning is something that all students have to do, and maybe not crazy about, because it is really quite demanding. This kind of learning involves a body of facts, multiple facts, involves multiple learning opportunities, because you're reading the material, trying to digest it, trying to find the structure and the way that those facts are organized. So you set up what's called a schema. And then this retrieving this information or consolidating it and then retrieving it involves long-term memory. And this is how we tested it. So James Cousins, who was involved in this work, created many colorful flashcards containing numerous facts about different sets of creatures. So that frogs, and then newts and salamanders. So you can see from this that there is structure involved in learning multiple facts about different animals, and some of the ways in which the way in which you can retain the information is benefited from properly learning the structure of information that is inherent in one particular animal. So there are two sets. We had two sets of creatures here, and then they were learned either in the morning following sleep restriction, on the afternoon after a nap, or without a nap. And then participants were tested at a neutral time, right? So here we actually looked at the interaction between nap opportunity, time of day learning, and total sleep duration over 24 hours on fact recall. And what we found was that independent of whether participants slept 6.5 or 8 hours in total, students assigned to the split sleep group performed better than those in the continuous sleep schedule. And what's interesting is that the benefit of learning in the afternoon, following a nap, did not come at a cost of compromising morning learning. So it does seem that a split sleep schedule is better for learning in the afternoon following a nap. Okay, so how is this realized? What is the magic behind this? I'm going to go through that in a second, but first I will just share another study we did on napping, which is comparing the relative benefit of napping versus cramming. So if you had time in the afternoon to nap, would you rather nap or would you rather just get another bout of learning? So James Cousins again introduced this experiment where participants had 5 bouts of learning. So, sorry, 4 bouts of learning, but during the manipulation period, the experimental manipulation, they could either nap for an hour, continue learning, or just chill and take a break, right? And then they had these biology flashcards to pick up. And what James found was that at 30 minutes after the last learning opportunity, participants who napped or crammed both did better in retrieving the factual information than those who stayed awake and watched a video. But at 7 days, whether it was certain or overall memory, the participants who napped were the ones who showed better memory scores compared to those who crammed. So if you had the time, it's probably better to take a nap, take a break. So how do naps work to benefit memory? What's the secret sauce? Now, during sleep, there are 2 things that happen that may benefit memory. Firstly, all the synapses and connections that are formed as a result of your learning activities, if they are allowed to continue unfettered, could compromise further learning. So downscaling, which is the pruning of less salient neural connections or synapses occurs during sleep. And the other thing is that sleep oscillations like slow waves provide a milieu for systems consolidation and memory. And what we found, I'm not going to elaborate in any detail here, is that the net benefit of encoding, which you can see here, the net benefit of encoding is associated with increased hippocampal activation following a nap, right? And then this increased hippocampal activation compared to the baseline period or the first encoding before the nap. Okay, and just to remind, the naps also provide a second opportunity to reduce sleep pressure. So how you can tell this is that the slow wave activity in the nights following the split sleep schedule is lower, the initial slow wave activity, suggesting that there is a reduction in the homeostat or the sleep pressure if you provide an opportunity for the afternoon nap. And this may help restore the encoding capacity. So who gains from afternoon napping? Because not everyone reports being napping habitually. But what we found is that participants 8 hours, sorry, I'm going to repeat that because the internet were given a total of 8 hours sleep opportunity. All participants could sleep in the afternoon, right? So even at with slightly reduced nocturnal sleep, the typical adolescent is able to nap. So To summarize what we've learned, naps can offset the effects of multi-night sleep restriction on vigilance and on vigilance and memory encoding. They have a restorative effect, perhaps on hippocampal function. Most adolescents can nap if allowed to. This ability to nap in the afternoon does not appear to compromise nocturnal sleep. And if available nocturnal sleep time is curtailed, a split sleep schedule incorporating naps might give favorable outcomes. And I think this herein lies, I think, our contribution to the science of learning. So with that, I thank you for your attention. Happy to take some questions. Of course, like to thank all the people involved in performing these studies, and my colleague Joshua Gooley, who's co-organized some of these sleep studies. So there are papers available from the website if you tap QR code, and also this is our microsite for the Need for Sleep studies. Slightly gone over time, but I'm happy to take some questions now.
Okay. Professor Chee, thank you so much. I found that absolutely electric. As the governor of a local school, so many practical lessons that I can take back to school. So I can also tell you that it was remarkable that I don't think hardly anyone left the talk from the very start, so you had everyone engaged. There have been a number of questions that have been posted in the meantime. Can I field a few for you?
Sure.
Okay. Let's have a look. Oh, is the circadian timing of the nap important?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Generally speaking, we're talking about studies that were performed with the students sleeping a reasonable sleep schedule. I know that a lot of secondary school, actually secondary school students is quite well controlled, but it's undergraduates who, especially in the modern day where there's, you can do offline learning now, funny sleep schedules. So with the caveat that we're talking about, nocturnal sleep, somewhere between 11 p.m. onset and waking up sometime early time in the morning. A mid-afternoon nap we think is suitable. We are actually looking at different sleep timings. We are a little concerned that some students say they come back. They can only come back home at 5 or 6 in the evening, and that's when they crash. And then they can sleep for 2 to 3 hours, which is going to interfere with nocturnal sleep. I think if you sleep that long and close to the the forbidden zone, so to speak. But mid-afternoon naps, from what we've seen, and we've documented this with PSG, look pretty good. All right, so you get a fair amount of slow wave sleep. You get less REM, but you get a good amount of slow wave sleep. And we did not have much problem with sleep inertia.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Let me switch to a subject that's very well debated here in the UK, but we've made no progress on. Let me draw on your experience. What have you done in Singapore about starting schools at a later time? And what's been the learning around that?
I'm just gonna just move this off for a sec. We actually ran a study on a high school, a girls only high school, because it was so difficult to get schools to participate in the Start School Later program. So the school start time in this girls high school was moved from 7:30 to 8:15, 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, the time in bed was extended by between 22 to 23 minutes. The actual gain in sleep time was about 10 minutes, but subjectively, the girls felt better, and they've kept that schedule now. I mean, it's been 5 years, but it's been very difficult to persuade the vested interests, and I'll say there are vested interests to shift that, and that's why I preface my some of the material I shared by saying that this is this solution is perhaps more acceptable socio-politically. I think it's there is evidence that starting school later is beneficial. The challenge is really it's social political, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Charlie, can you please share your screen?
Yes, no problem. Absolutely, I can. Present. Back. Share. Okay, that means I'm going to cut across what Mike's here. Okay, can you see that, Yusu? Hello?
Yes. I cannot see your screen.
Okay, sorry. Let me come back. Share. You see now?
Yes, this is perfect.
Okay. So let's pick some of these other questions. Yes, so electric findings that 6.5 and an hour and a half was as good, if not better than 8 hours continually. What about this idea of how easy was that to find an hour and a half in the student schedule to find a mid-afternoon nap?
Well, look, this was the study was performed in quasi-laboratory conditions. As we booked out a big section of a school dormitory, and ran the study during the school holidays. I mean, this did not occur in a regular term time.
Okay.
I think I'd like to address this question about, okay, so the optimal time in the afternoon. I think sometime in mid-afternoon, we had these naps occur, starting at 2:30 or 3 p.m. depending on the specific study. 2:30, I believe, for the 1.5 hour schedules, nap schedules, and 3 for the 1 hour schedules. Yes, it would be challenging to get 1.5 hours opportunity, but you can see that here, the benefits are very substantial. I mean, frankly, they surprised us, even the size of these effects. However, I would say also, relative to starting school later, it might be easier to implement because it doesn't get into your traffic situation and also where parents want to send their children to school. In fact, one of the comments that we have amongst parents is that they're so busy that this is their only opportunity to really talk to the child, which is pretty sad, but we hear this a fair bit. So it's a little bit more acceptable, but of course, especially in school districts where sports and all that takes place in the afternoon, this could compromise that. There's going to be some trade-off, but yeah. The 20-minute power naps, I think, we're looking at this. So I believe Leon Lax is a person who has done systematic research titrating nap durations. We're repeating that with new technology and with a larger sample to look at what you can gain from these shorter naps. The reason why we looked at longer naps is because we wanted to follow some of the prior work, for example, by the group in Harvard, Susan, Sarah Madnick, and for example, where they had a longer nap because they wanted some REM sleep. So the theory is that you have one complete full cycle of sleep that may be beneficial. But for our students, with this very valuable slow wave sleep that's involved in memory consolidation and restoring memory encoding ability, if you're slightly sleep restricted, even you're slightly sleep restricted, these young brains hold on to slow wave sleep like sponges. You know, they defend it very robustly. It's quite remarkable how they do that, right? And how efficient their sleep is. You know, I mean, they just lie down and bang, they're off. You know, I wish you could do that now. I can't.
Professor Chee, there are so many. Let me just see if there are also some good questions on here because I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, with sleeping a full 8 hours but having a 1 hour nap. Let me just get this thing out of the way. Even more beneficial than 6.5. But yeah, I guess, you know, there are different combinations. We tested combinations that you know, would be of interest to the local populace a little bit. So yeah, it's something I'll certainly try. A 7+1. What about the effects of food on our studies? Well, Joshua Woolley, my colleague in UK and US now, has actually measured the food intake for the fourth edition of the study. He hasn't written up his findings, but I can tell you that if when these teenagers are asked to stay up a little bit more, you know, we had to keep buying snacks for them. They were voracious, I would say, you know. The novelty wore off after a while, but you know, the first nights we were watching our budget, snacks were just disappearing as if in the black hole.
Lovely.
What's the optimum nap time so it doesn't interrupt nocturnal sleep? Okay, so I guess this is something of active research. You know, we're looking at that. Yeah.
Yes.
We suspect the shorter naps probably will work. Yeah, 1.5 hours is difficult to make provisions for, really. I agree. Yeah,
just for time, Professor Chee, could I ask? Yeah, well, so you've been brilliant about saying really top-class research. What studies have you got planned for the future that are going to be really valuable? You know, what's exciting you about work coming up?
Yeah, we're continuing to look at nap titration. So these are some of the practical things that we can look at, the different durations, and a little bit more into the different combinations of nocturnal and you know, daytime naps. Although I think we've looked at pretty good now. Sleep effects of sleep regularity. So most of the studies, you know, talking about adequacy of sleep, they're based on an average sleep duration. But you know, now with wearables and different tech devices, we can get a much finer grain read on how people sleep, and so we're looking at that. Also, the metabolic consequences. There's a piece of work that was very important, I think, that I didn't share in this presentation. The split sleep schedule is great for cognition, but it wasn't so good when you gave a glucose bolus. So the ability of these adolescents handle a load of sugar was actually better with a continuous sleep schedule. So that was with the 6.5 hour total sleep. So for the 8, we're not so sure. That's important because, you know, we have to look at sleep as a holistic contributor to health. And, you know, it's well-being, it's cognition, but it's also metabolic health that you need to think about.
Professor Chee, you've been absolutely brilliant. On behalf of all the audience, I want to thank you so much. You were everything we hoped for and more. So can we just have a round of applause for Mike, because that really was, in my view, a 10 out of 10 presentation. Thank you so much, sir.
Well, thanks, Charlie, and for inviting me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I hope you know, word goes out. Thanks.
Yes, and of course you're talking from authority, because you know Singapore's already leading the top academy tables, and from the work that you're doing, I can see how not only are you going to hold on to that, but maybe even increase it. So congratulations for the work that you are achieving, not just for the research.
Well, thank you. I hope, you know, I think you know, we certainly like the academic kudos, but I think what's more important is that we make an impact on our respective societies, and that this work can translate into practical outcomes that affect people. So,
Okay.
with
Thank
that
you very
thought,
much. So we'd love to have you back at a later date.
will do.
Thank you, Professor Chee. Thank you
Alright.
all very much for listening. We've got Professor Emmanuel Mignon coming up as our next talker, one of the world's leading researchers on narcolepsy, so really top stuff. He'll have a job improving on Professor Chee, but he's in a good position to have a go. So thank you all very much, and remember just to follow us on social media and spread the good word. Thank you.
All right. Congratulations. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.